All right. Good morning, friends. Let's open our time with a word of prayer. Father God, thank you for the minds that you have given us and the opportunity for adult education. We ask you, Lord, that you would encourage us, challenge us, and equip us to love you and love one another better. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, can I steal this real quick? Noelle, Rachel needs another one. I forgot to print my notes, my outline. So Pastor Lindsay's being a great friend. And I'm waiting for her to walk in any moment. It's going to be awesome. Wow. Okay. So we have, there's going to be a lot of content today, and there will be some times to stop and ask questions, and I'm totally happy to help you answer those questions afterwards if we run out of time. Friends, we are here because our kids, these kids these days, who are our kids, I heard a quote the other day that said, there's no such thing as other people's kids. Now, I don't want to take that all the way to the end, but I think as the church that's a helpful sentiment. Whose kids are those? Well, they're our kids. That's right, because that's how God calls us to be. And so there is something pretty serious happening with our kids. They are experiencing mental health challenges like they never have before, and this is all happening as the rapid increase of technology and social media has taken over. And so we want to roll up our sleeves and wade into those things and ask ourselves, okay, as the people of God, people who are called to imitate our great heavenly parent. Jim, are we good? Sweet. What are we to do? Here are our assumptions. God desires for kids to thrive and to flourish, right? He's created them in his image, all kids. We are to imitate him, and that we want to go to the scriptures to guide us in wisdom. So we're going to do a quick lightning fast recap, and then we're going to dive into some new content today. We also know that we have a pretty rough track record for innovation, for anything new. We have thought these technologies were either A, of the devil, or B, the savior of the world, right? We want to get out of these extremes. We want to be a people that stay away from assimilation when it comes to technology. Nice. That's awesome. We want to stay away from assimilation. We want to stay away from revolution. We want to stay away from escapism. And we really, as the people of God, want to engage in critical engagement with anything new. And so to do that, we are called to test the spirits, not to just get carried away by the sort of wisdom of the age. And what that is going to mean for us is that we are in the world, not of it, right? We're going to be up close and personal, and our faith is always expressed in and through culture, and technology is a part of culture. But we don't want to be of the world. We still want to be in the way of Jesus. And so our question is, will media, technology be a wall? Or will it be a bridge? And if it's going to be a bridge, what size should it be? And we're talking about this because something that is definitely new, but a term I want us to be really comfortable with is that kids these days are digital natives. That means they grew up in a world where technology is normative. Social media, iPhones, supercomputers in our pockets, totally normative. Who here remembers their first phone number? And I don't mean cell phone, I mean like house phone. 732-303-8977. Pretty easy one, actually. That's not bad, right? That's my first. I learned that. I think I might have been 8 years old, 7 years old. I'm not sure. I was talking with my wife, Noelle, who's a teacher, and we were sharing about some of our experiences with kids. And most kids these days don't know their own phone number, right? And she had an experience where she had a student that she was trying to help get home or get in touch with another student. She said, hey, can you give me your best friend's phone number so I can call them. And that student said, I don't have my best friend's phone number. What do you mean? Well, I communicate with them on Snapchat. I don't have their phone number. Now, some of us bristle at that. We're like, oh my gosh, kids these days, they don't even know their own phone number. This is the different world that we're living in. They are digital natives, and it is different, and some of it is dangerous, but not all of it. It's just different, and we are digital immigrants. And so we're called to bloom, where we're planted, and to engage in critical engagement. All right, that was a sort of lightning fast recap of what we talked about last week. If you missed it, there's an outline. It was live streamed. Does anyone have any questions from sort of just that brief summary, or any clarifying questions for what we talked about last week? Great. Okay. Before we dive into some of the research, we want to just look at how do we define adolescence? This is general. So adolescence, typically ages 10 to 18 plus. I say 18 plus because as society has changed and some of those markers for adulthood, including marriage, living alone, financial independence, they have all been pushed off. We have a whole new term we call emerging adulthood. It's kind of between that term, young adulthood. That's a conversation for another time. But adolescence, 10 to 18 plus. Most people would say, between developmental psychologists, youth ministry experts, that adolescence is both a developmental reality and a cultural phenomenon. That is, there are some things that for kids just developmentally that are happening in them, and then it's a cultural phenomenon. And I do want to clarify that when I talk about kids, adolescence, teen culture is sort of a new thing, like 1950s it came around when secondary education became mandated. We talked about that a lot in our Gen Z class. But just know that culture plays a huge role today for today's kids in how adolescence is experienced and expressed. The importance of peers incline and self-esteem declines. This is especially true in early adolescence and for girls. This thing, as some psychologists call the imaginary audience, happens. I'm not sure this totally goes away when we're adults, but the volume is turned way up as teens. I think about me all the time, so everyone else must be thinking about me all the time. And because of this, they're easily lured by activities that offer social validation. And as we think about how social media plays into this, that's going to be important. Probably big surprise to you guys, conflict with parents and mood disruption increases. That was a joke. This narrative of like, no one understands me is sort of being played for them. Risk behaviors increase during this time. While reward-seeking parts of the brain mature earlier, the frontal cortex, which is like self-control, delayed gratification, resistance to temptation, that's not at full capacity until the mid-20s. This sort of, it won't happen to me kind of attitude. Interestingly, though, and I think some of the research we're going to look at corroborates why this is happening, is that risk behaviors for today's teens, for Gen Z, such as sex, substances, or even risky driving, has actually decreased significantly. Good news, but we have to ask why. What's actually happening? Identity, belonging, and purpose. Who am I? Where do I fit in? And what difference can I make? I think all humans are asking these questions, but for adolescents, again, they are turned way up, especially belonging. Very brief. What would you add to this description if you wanted to add anything? Is there something you feel like I'm missing? Mental health, sure. So these are adolescents in general, but that's a great question, actually. Have adolescents always struggled with mental health issues? We're going to get into that. That's great. All right. One more framework before we look at the research is that when we are testing the experience, when we are discerning anything, we want to look at the fruit. This comes from the words of Jesus himself in his most famous teaching, the Sermon on the Mount, where he discusses kind of discerning who, or I would say even what, is for us. This is his litmus test, Matthew chapter 7, verses 16 to 17 and 20. You will know them by their fruits. He's talking about teachers. Are grapes gathered from thorns or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. Thus you will know them by their fruits. We want to look at the fruit of technology and social media and the way that we've been interacting with it over the last several years. And what sort of fruit are we looking for? What's the good fruit? Well, Paul tells us in Galatians pretty clearly, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. That's the fruit we're looking for. Now, I also want to reiterate here that there's no condemnation or that sort of judgment in this class. That's not the point. We're all here because we want to grow in our love for the next generation and perhaps maybe even grow in our own relationship with social media and technology and how we help redeem what's happening in mental health. So, what about the digital landscape? We're going to start there with technology. And you see a picture of that book up there. That is The Anxious Generation by social psychologist Jonathan Haidt. A lot of the research in here was compiled by him and another researcher, Jean Twenge, and some other resources. But his work, I would say, is maybe one of the greatest articulations of sort of what is happening today, the research and the history that we've seen. Haidt is an atheist, but I would say that he is the most pro-faith atheist that I have ever read. I mean, he's like, hey, all these things about faith are great for you. I just don't believe it. I'm like, okay, well, thank you, Jonathan. That's helpful. But we can learn from all sorts of people, right? Great. All right. Social media use, smartphones, were adopted faster than any other communication technology in history. This is just one graph among many that we can show. But that tells us that there was less time to adjust. And I would say less time for parents to really think about how is this going to impact our kids or even ourselves. So adopted faster than any other technology. And here are some of the stats and figures that we see. In 2015, 1 in 5 American teen girls used social media more than 40 hours a week. By 2016, 79% of teens owned a smartphone and 28% of 8 to 12-year-olds. By 2023, more than 46% of teens report being online almost all the time. We're talking about teens, but I think it would be a good idea to just be reflecting and saying, what would my own numbers report? What does this look like? I was going to mess around with you guys and be like, all right, we're all going to do a screen time inventory. It's like a little app on your phone. And then we're going to post it up on just kidding. We're not going to do that. But it's important. Continuing, 75% of teens check phones as soon as they wake up. 40% feel anxious without phones. Some of you were part of Serve Saturday, awesome day where the church left the building. 2 years ago when we did Serve Saturday, we had our teenagers sleep outside, and a couple of them slept outside in cardboard boxes, just to walk in the shoes of people who that's their daily experience. And, we're like, wow, there's some kids willing to do that. That's really cool. And so part of that was like, you can only bring one thing with you, and it can't be your phone, right? This is sacrifice. And there was 2 of our kids who had such a huge reaction to not being able to have their phone with them as they were going to sleep. I mean, almost full-blown anxiety attack. That you know me, I'm not afraid to hold someone accountable. And I said, hey, we're not gonna fight that battle right now. You can keep your phone. I mean, it was that serious. And we're talking about with a group of people, their house is right far away. The anxiety and the separation is real. And then there's this other statistic, is that nearly 70% have received support through social media during tough times. Okay, so it's not all bad. Great. But we'll see later, how does that factor in? I want to talk a little bit about the power and influence of social media. I think you could probably have in a whole adult ed class about this. And I'm actually sure if it's not too helpful to get overly interested in the mechanics of why social media is so engulfing. I think we could talk a lot about that and sort of get away from a solution. Almost, I don't want social media to be the scapegoat. Oh, it's so bad, it's taken over, there's nothing we can do about it. I don't believe that's true at all. But there are a couple mechanics that we should know, especially when it comes to our teens. For teens, they're really susceptible to what psychologists call conformity bias. That is, they are motivated to copy whatever is most common. Motivated to copy whatever is most common, conformity bias. And then also prestige bias. Again, it's not only teens, but they're very susceptible to this, which motivates them to copy whoever seems to be the most accomplished or prestigious. Teens want to copy whoever seems to be the most accomplished or prestigious. So, when you can comb through 1,000 data points that are curated to what you will linger at and look at longer, these two things go through the roof. And so Haidt would say that social media is the most efficient conformity engine that the world has ever created. Which is, we actually see these like sweeping trends of things that are like, what do you mean people are ripping off soap dispensers in the bathroom? Well, TikTok told them to do it, and now there's nationwide soap dispensers being ripped off in public school bathrooms. Like, wow, conformity bias. There's also some good things, like, hey, we should do this prayer at this time, and then nationwide these kids are praying this particular prayer, but conformity engine nonetheless. And then the best comparison for social media and the algorithms that these companies have come up with, which they make money on the attention and time that we spend, is to slot machines. And the one mechanic there is that they operate on a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. What that means is that the number of inputs to get a reward varies. So you never know when you're going to get that reward. Is it going to be after 2? Is it going to be after 4? Is it going to be after 1? Is back to back? And that really keeps us going. Quick show of hands. Has anyone ever scrolled through any sort of social media longer than you intended? Great, our kids aren't alone. And everyone who didn't raise their hand doesn't have it. That's my guess. That's just a guess, but or you guys are really self-controlled, and that's awesome. Fruit of the Spirit. Okay, so as we just proved with that little hand-raising exercise, it's not just teens, but since we're talking about teens, I want to talk about parents specifically, and here's just one statistic of many. 60% of parents feel they are sometimes or often distracted by their phones when they are spending time with their children. Okay, it's not just teens. Families are being impacted in a multitude of ways. Great. So it's kind of like, so what? Okay, we get it. The iPhone social media marriage, super powerful, took over really fast, but so what? What's the impact? What has happened? And I want to show us a little timeline before we get into some of the mental health statistics. First iPhone comes out in 2007. By 2008, we have Facebook, which is going to be the first major social media application. 2010, the iPhone 4 comes out. That is significant because that was the first forward-facing camera. The selfie is invented, at least the easily accessed selfie. And at the same time, this is interesting, Instagram comes out in 2010. Why that's so significant is because Instagram was only on phones for the first couple of years. So now it's really honed in on this social media phone in your pocket 24/7 all the time. And then by 2012 and 2013, smartphones and social media, that combination reaches the majority of homes. So keep that 2012, 2013 number in your head a little bit as we look at some of these statistics. But you're also going to see in some of these graphs a shaded region. That shaded region is from 2010 to 2015. And that's what Haidt refers to as the great rewiring of childhood. Sort of as phones and social media got into the hands of our preteens and teens, this is the result, or at least we can track the pattern. And he says this: social patterns, role models, emotions, physical activity, and even sleep patterns were fundamentally recast for adolescents over the course of just 5 years, 2010 to 2015. Okay. Yeah, sure. Should have put up on a slide. It's also probably in your notes. Yeah, but I'll happily read it again. Social patterns, role models, emotions, physical activity, and even sleep patterns were fundamentally recast for adolescents over the course of just 5 years. Right. Okay. So let's take a look at mental health. This is the percentage of teens who had at least one major depressive episode in the last year going through 2022. As you can see, it has more than doubled since 2010. You have a couple statistics on the next slide. Depression and social connection has strong links. Great. Okay. Social connection has been impacted. We see depression go up. If we think about depression, we also think about anxiety. Now, this is a little bit of an older age data set, but I just wanted to show this particular graph because you can see that the younger ages are so disproportionately impacted by this marriage of smartphones and technology and social media, to the point where even in these studies, the 50 to plus category is less anxious. It's a huge, huge difference. Again, not that adults aren't impacted, but that teens are especially impacted. Now, please pause it up. Yep.
I just thought it was interesting to see that, like, we all have heard a lot about COVID and the impact of COVID, but like the slope coming out of COVID is really no steeper for young people than the years before that.
Yeah. We think a lot about COVID and kind of look at COVID as like COVID just wrecked our young people, but they're like, no. We were heading in that way, and COVID was a great accelerant, and that is true in this graph. But what you're going to see, Mike, is that you will see some upticks in the COVID years as we kind of get into more of these statistics. So some people will say, okay, is it real? What I just showed you are all self-report statistics. Someone said, this has happened to me, this has been my experience. And we don't want to invalidate someone's experience, but we know there are some phenomenons, like when stigmas are eliminated or shrunk, people are more comfortable to share these things, okay? Or when we start to name something, oh, that's anxiety, that's the experience you're having, well, then we can track it and we have more statistics. But it's not just self-report data. These are emergency room visits for self-harm. Huge increases. I mean, huge increases across all ages. Yeah. And then we see suicide. Remember, 2010 is kind of that marker of, okay, where are we going? And, these aren't just statistics. We're seeing this at Crossroads a ton. I mean, we have recommended so many kids to therapists, talked to so many parents about suicidal ideation, self-harm, absolutely, eating disorders. Will Anderson Beck, phenomenal shepherd. Him and I will sometimes go and visit students in hospitals for mental health. And we had this experience. We went to this hospital at night, and I guess we came in a different way, but we were sort of leaving, and I was thinking to myself, I was like, wait a second. Will, I feel like we've been here before. Oh, that's right. We were here last year visiting a different student. We have had 3 students attempt suicide this year. Yeah, we need to pay attention. Something is happening to our kids. In my 7 years that I've been the director of Crossroads or part of that team, I've never had a student attempt suicide. We've had suicidal ideation, self-harm, and again, these are statistics that we're seeing. That's just our sample size, but this is very, very real. 3 that we know of. I would say maybe 100 students, maybe more than that, actually. Maybe 150, because it's not about average attendance numbers, it's about all the kids that we. Let's say calendar year, yeah. Right, yeah. 3 students over the last calendar year. Right. And Hyatt has discovered that the research says that these statistics aren't just true in America, they're true all across what he calls the Anglosphere. So that is like English-speaking countries, Australia, England, Canada. I don't know the stats on just industrialized countries. I know what my guess would be, but just for us to pay attention is like, oh, this is a phenomenon that's happening to people where this technology and this social media and these age groups has happened. He makes a ton of arguments for like, hey, unemployment wasn't down, and you know, all these other things that we typically look to for mental health factors. And he's like, there is nothing else to explain this. He names 4 foundational harms for our kids. He talks about social deprivation, teens spending 6 to 8 hours a day on screen-based leisure activities. And with that has come the daily time with friends has sharply increased. When I say with friends, I mean face-to-face, in person with friends. And just less time with friends or with peers face-to-face has links to mental health. He talks about sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation for teens has been on the rise for years, and there are studies that link this to tech use, the more social media use, the less sleep you get. And of course, poor sleep leads to poor mental health outcomes. I don't have to tell you guys that. He talks about attention fragmentation, that for communication apps alone, the average teen gets 192 alerts a day. Yeah. This is super interesting. One study found that intellectual performance was best when phones were left in the other room, was worse when phones were visible, and fell somewhere in the middle when they were in the pocket. Best, totally away, out of sight. Worst, visible, in the middle when they're in the pocket. We could feel them, but we can't see them. And so I think that's should really inform our faithful way forward. And then there's addiction. Again, we talked about that slot machine thing. There are certainly teens who have experienced like full-blown addiction, but I actually want to say that I don't think that's a super helpful use of language. Most of the time, as far as I know, I feel like I know quite a bit about that realm, our suggestion, the way forward for addiction, is complete abstinence, right? That's not what we're suggesting. Maybe at a certain age, but we're not suggesting like, hey, just don't ever use technology again as you mature and become an older teen and an adult. So I just want to caveat with addiction. Let's be careful there. These teens are addicted to their phones. Not sure that's helpful. Great. And this...
play or
And we're going to get, you are all over, and we're going to get there. No, I love it. Please, if you have thoughts, I love it. It's so helpful. And I just want us to chew on this quote. The cost of a thing is the amount of life which is required to be exchanged for it immediately or in the long run. Let's count the cost. What's going on? All right, quick word about our girls specifically. In 2013, psych wards began to fill up disproportionately with girls rather than boys. There's also a similar experience with the rates of gender dysphoria for girls rather than boys, sort of around that time. And here are some of the just what psychologists say are true and what I feel like we know to be true about girls. They're more affected by visual comparison and perfectionism. Okay. Aggression is more relational, which can happen over social media. They more easily share emotions and disorders, something called social contagion that psychologists have studied over time. That is more easily shared with girls. And they're more easily subject to predation and harassment. Of course, we know that to be true.
Can you explain a little bit more about what aggression is more relational means?
What is it?
Aggression is more relational for girls. The idea is that it might be easier to explain what it's not, is that for boys, it's typically more physical. They take out aggression through wrestling or even fighting, physical altercations. That's much less the case with girls. Their aggression might be expressed more relationally as a not physical. Thanks, drama gossip. I don't want to generalize or paint girls in one way or paint boys in one way, but here's general trends that we're seeing. Is like, hey, why are these psych wards filling up with girls? What do we know to be generally true of girls? Right. I think boys' aggression, I think boys can be dramatic and gossipy too. So, speaking of, a word about our boys. Hyde tells a story and shows some statistics. Now, we saw them, so it's not like, hey, boys are fine, girls are not. I think all our kids are going to be fine if we step up and be faithful, but there's a serious issue going on with both. But the story for boys, he says, is longer and more gradual of a decline. For girls, it's very clear. Whoa, technology, social media came out, it's a poof, went way down. He attributes this a little bit to online video games, which also like kind of came on the scene slower, has diminished some face-to-face interaction. To be fair, there can be some positive benefits, but not when it replaces face-to-face interaction or after it reaches X amount of hours. I don't actually have the statistics on that, but that's the conversation. Then there's pornography, and I really, really want to say that that is not just a boy thing. It is more a boy thing, but with the onset of supercomputers and pockets, the numbers for girls have actually increased at a much steeper rate, but the general numbers for boys is much higher. Average age of first exposure, 11 years old. That's just breaks my heart. And then Haidt talks about some societal shifts. Boys are engaged in less risk, and he quotes scholar Richard Reeves, who says, an economy that no longer rewards physical strength, an educational system that prizes the ability to sit still. Just some shifts in society, service industry, what's going on in schools, which are both things that boys either excel at or don't excel at, like sitting still. We're going to get into more of sort of that, but I just want to say the results are in. For a long time, people said, well, you know, teens receive support, and so, I don't know, social media is kind of fine. We don't really have the data to say that it's causing some of these issues, and it seems like it's really bad for the kids that are already struggling, but for kids who are thriving, it's not so bad. It kind of depends on family, it depends on socioeconomic status. The results are in. Surgeon General, social media poses a profound risk of harm to the mental health and well-being of children and adolescents, and there are study after study. It is no longer just correlation, but causality. Okay. Sure. Teens say that social media gives them a connection with friends, and that may be true, but the results are in. It is not nearly as helpful as what it has replaced. You guys were kind of jumping up and going for it. I love it. Any questions about those stats, anything we just talked about? Yeah.
Earlier you gave the statistics of Western English-speaking portions of the world in relation to what? Is there a comparison to, say, cultures that have been traditionally?
Yeah, great question, Ron. So, sure. So we talked about, those are all the statistics I showed are all American statistics, and Ron is asking, well, are we, what are they in relation to? Are we comparing the Anglosphere and those statistics to other cultures that don't fit that? And the answer is no. Those statistics are compared to their own statistics. Pre-phone statistics, 2004, here were the numbers for mental health. 2016, here are the numbers for mental health. So that's the comparison. I don't have the numbers for the comparison.
Maybe there's something we're doing.
Yeah, I would say what I'm saying is that all of these countries that have smartphones and social media are seeing this decline. Yeah, I don't have I want to know about some of the other industrialized countries that aren't part of the Anglosphere, and that may be in that book, and I'm sure the research is out there. So I don't want to misspeak and make these claims that I can't back up with research that I've read with my own eyes, or that I don't remember where I read it. But that's my understanding. But we can at least start with, okay, the Anglosphere, here's what's happening. Yeah.
Don't have based statistics, don't have any of this technology, like their mental health, like way up.
Sure. Yeah.
Countries don't have any of this access, none of the smartphones.
Right. What's happening with countries? Yeah. Sure. again, I don't want to misquote, but I'm pretty sure it has stayed the same, or there's even some improvement. I think I was trying to focus on what's happening here and what we are seeing happening, but that would be helpful just for, hey, how do we move forward? All right. I'm going to skip that and move on to something that Jonathan Haidt calls safetyism. So he tells a larger story. This is sort of a larger societal shift. He's saying that safetyism over the last few decades has increased tremendously. And this is the belief that safety trumps everything else, no matter how unlikely or trivial the potential danger. So, question for you guys. How old were you when your parents let you walk to a friend's house or go to a park alone? Do I have anyone who is 6 years old? Wow. How about 8 years old? Okay. How about 10 years old? Okay. 12 years old? Interesting. So generally, Gen X and older, I'm not going to name that age, I'm not sure, maybe 40 years old and older, say 6 to 8 years old. And for Gen Z, the range is 10 to 12. Again, this is generally, because some of you just kind of disproved that, but you actually, I think it fit pretty well in that range. That is just one manifestation of safetyism, which comes with this other interesting sort of range of statistics that say risk to children from crime, violence, drunk drivers, and most other sources has steeply dropped since the 1990s. And man, it's really interesting when I was just having a conversation with one of my aunts last night, and she said, oh, you know, we used to walk and da-da-da, but you can't do that anymore because it's so dangerous. And I said, actually, it's less dangerous than it was in the 90s. Maybe not when you were growing up, but, you know, we've had a really sharp incline. She said, no way, no way. And we started talking about it, and my aunt's just awesome, and she was like, wow, I never thought about that. Okay, yeah. We hear about how dangerous it is, right? Okay. Safetyism, which has led to a decline in play and hanging out, like we said. These studies of kids being face-to-face, hanging out with friends, but also unsupervised hanging out of preteens, teenagers has declined significantly. Studies show that humans come out socially, cognitively, and emotionally impaired when they're derived of play, independent play, and physical risk-taking. That these things are so important, but those things have all declined. Jonathan Haidt talks about we used to have these play-based childhoods, and that declined and became a phone-based childhood. You know, we like the iPad kid, we say that. And again, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, but it's like we have gone way too far in one direction. Okay. Safetyism and parenting. Society is structured, even legally in some ways, to sort of produce, condone safetyism. And this is the argument that Haidt makes. And again, it's not without its merits, but I'm just saying the pendulum has swung. There's a sociologist, Arnett Leroux, that talks about these two different forms of parenting, concerted cultivation and natural growth parenting. Concerted cultivation is like the carpenter model, where you need like exact measurements, and it takes just an extraordinary degree of care and training. Think like baby Einstein and hours of lessons, and like this is what kids need. Then there's the flip side of that, which is natural growth parenting, which says, no, honestly, if you let kids be, they will become competent and responsible adults without a great deal of hand-holding. The shift has been towards concerted cultivation in the physical realm, and it's sort of interesting because in the digital realm, it's all natural growth. Here you go. Have at it. And so it's not like, oh, this one's worse and this one's better. You know, research is saying that a harmony between the two is actually really helpful. But we see where we have helicopter parenting, right, which is associated with later anxiety disorders, this kind of overbearing. That's a little more concerted cultivation. Has anyone ever heard the term stranger danger? Right? It's like kind of a relatively new phenomenon, relatively new in like the last several decades, but it's a thing that happened in culture, and then it blew up and it became popular. And it really just isolated parents. Where it used to be that everyone was parenting your kid, right? It was like a village mentality. Now, all the burden is on parents to do it yourself. And it's even like, well, you can't tell someone else how to parent your kid. It's like, no way. It's like, these kids are our kids. Hey, get out of the street. What are you doing? My aunt told me another story last night that her and her friend, they're like 7, 8 years old, and they want to go to the beach. And so they saw in a cartoon that you could tie like a bandana with your belongings to a pole, and you could kind of walk. So they're on the side of the road. They're in Rumson, and they're hitchhiking. And this lady stops by, and she says, "Oh, hey, girls, where are you going? Where do you want to go?" And she says, I want to go to the beach." "Great, get in." "Where does your mother live?" Whew, right to the house, right? Like that's what we're looking for. But we're losing it. We're missing it. Like, front porches are extinct, right? Okay. And so the Surgeon General says this about parents in a new mental health advisory, not for teens, for parents, that they're too stressed to function. 48% of parents feel completely overwhelmed compared to 26% of people who don't have children. And I just got to say, wow, I think the church is just so uniquely positioned to do something about this. This community where we're seen, known, and celebrated, where we come together, we can be accountable and honest. Okay, as we move into the way forward, I want to talk about something called the right kind of suffering. Our kids are going to suffer. As Mariana Brusoni, child development psychologist, says, we are to keep them safe as necessary, not safe as possible. Right? Paul says it this way: not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. There's this phrase, anti-fragile, which describes things that actually need to get knocked over now and then to become strong. There's this experiment of growing these trees in this biodome in perfect conditions, and when the trees reached maturity, they actually fell over. What they had discovered is that there was no wind in the biodome. The wind pushing the tree helps the roots grow strong so that when it reaches maturity, it could hold its own weight. Psychologists say, and I feel like we intuitively know, and God teaches us if we look at the scriptures, that kids are anti-fragile. That they need these risks and things to grow, that thrilling experiences actually have antiphobic effects. But healthy development depends on getting the right experiences at the right age and in the right order. And we put the cart before the horse when it comes to the physical world and the digital one. The things they're learning and experiencing in the digital world, is absolutely the wrong order. On social media, even small mistakes can have huge costs and live on forever. Haidt says this: children do not evolve to handle the virility, anonymity, instability, and potential for large-scale public shaming on the virtual world. In the virtual world, even adults have trouble with it. Adolescents are most susceptible to those things. All right. So we have technology. Rapidly takes over culture. Then we have this sort of other thing happening in the background. We can call it safetyism. We're just sort of isolating people. We want to be safe for the sake of being safe, not knowing that being overly safe actually has consequences. And from all that, we see this abysmal picture of our kids, these kids these days, suffering mentally. Let's take a breath. That's a lot. It's not a great picture. It feels overwhelming. Can we do anything about it? I think absolutely we can. And I do want to say that all is not lost. These kids these days are resilient. They're highly likely to volunteer. They're inclusive. They care deeply about the environment. The majority believe in God and identify as spiritual. And when I say that they're resilient, what I mean is that they are still doing these things in spite of what they've been given. As far as resilience as a character trait, that has been down. but all is not lost. Where do we go from here? I think we need to consider the story. The story that I just laid out, that Hyatt lays out in his book, that we're all sort of talking about. Because I'm convinced that the answer to that story is to invite our kids into a better one, into a better story. One that is not phone-based, without restriction, or physically risk-free, but a better story. And I would say you can tell a lot about a story by its title. When it comes to your kids or the kids around you, how would you title the story you're inviting them into? And here's just a few examples of titles I feel like I've heard and I've seen. What would you like that title to be? And this is going to be really important. What role do your kids play in that story? Now, this is a big global sort of idea. It's not just specific to technology, but we can also ask, what would the chapter on technology say? For your family, for the kids that you see in the community, for the kids that you have influence on in our church or in any of your sphere of influence. Again, that's a pretty abysmal story, and so I think we need to invite our kids into a greater story. Story of God's love and redemption of the world, that they are a child of God in that story. Partnership with God in the no matter what community of the church, quite different from the social media experience, as his agents of love and reconciliation with some actual ability to make a difference, and being formed into the likeness of Christ by the power of the Spirit through blessing and suffering. We want our kids not to not suffer at all, but to suffer well. I know that's hard. So the next faithful step. Start where you are, not where you should be. Author Margaret Gunther says, beware of the first week of Lent syndrome. I'm going to give up food. Yeah, it's like, hold on. We want you to be successful in this endeavor. Start where you are, not where you should be. Great. And then one of my seminary professors came up with this model. Direct, protect, and connect. Let's keep it simple. Direct, protect, and connect. And hey, where we are in different ages of kids that we're interacting with or that we're parenting to is going to dictate how we respond. But we want to direct, protect, and connect. So, direct. Begins with, what would kids say about your technology and social media use? The research is abundantly clear that when it comes to our kids, we get what we are. Okay. It's hard. I get it. In our house, we have pretty firm boundaries around technology, which we'll talk a little bit about protect. And that's because without those, we will fail. We know that. Demandingness versus responsiveness, this idea of control and rules versus allowing our kids and teens to express their autonomy, to incrementally make their own decisions, right? We want to live in that tension. And I love this. Our job is not to make their lives easier, but to make their lives better, which might not only always mean easier. We direct by setting the direction. I love the idea of a media and tech covenant, essentially something that is written, that comes up with, rules, guidelines for technology, but I think maybe even more importantly, defining the purpose of technology in our homes, in our families, and in our communities. At ABC, we're thinking about this deeply right now. We're spending a ton of time at Crossroads thinking about it. What's the purpose of technology? What's the purpose going to be here in this context? Here's a great example. Is it going to be for building relationships? And then, this phone is our phone. That should maybe be at the top of the tech and media covenant. I said this last week, but I have yet to meet a teenager who can afford an iPhone. All right. And I know it's hard. We're going to talk about that. I would also say just as important as what you say is how often you talk about tech and social media. If it's an everyday part of our life, we should be talking about it. Maybe not every day, but it needs to be an ongoing conversation, as with most things that are big and important. Author Andy Dillard says, how we spend our days, of course, how we spend our lives, and the idea that the Apostle Paul articulated 2,000 years ago so well is that we are forming persons. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, he says, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. We want to form persons. The story we invite them into is the story that they live out. Pastor John Mark Comer says spiritual formation happens to everyone, whether we are into it or not. Here are some of the ways that we form persons. I'll just lift up the last one here, and you have these in your notes. Author Andy Crouch wrote a great book called Tech-Wise Family. Highly, highly recommends. And he says we need to make 3 decisions. And one of those decisions is to say that we are going to choose character. We're going to make the mission of our family for children and adults alike the cultivation of wisdom and character. Okay. We want to protect. Those are a bunch of ideas of how to protect. Did anyone have a cookie jar when you were growing up? Maybe still a cookie jar. Where was it located in your house? Very high. On top of the refrigerator. That's why? Because your spouse is short and you didn't want them? No, because kids don't always know what's best for themselves. They will eat all those cookies. Okay, we need to protect. There's some physical things that we put in place. I mentioned parental controls up there, and my caveat to that is that that's not the end-all, be-all. We have a resource guide for you at the end that can walk you through a ton of things. I would love to walk you through them and help you set them up. You don't have to do this stuff alone. Important, but not the end-all, be-all. 1 Peter 2:11, Beloved, I urge you as aliens and exiles to abstain from the desires of the flesh that wage war against the soul. I don't feel like it's dramatic to say that these things are waging war against the souls of our kids and ourselves. Just want to highlight sleep is so important, and technology is getting in the way. Andy Crouch's second decision is to shape space, to make choices about the place where we live that put the development of character and creativity at the heart of our home. How are we shaping space? This looks like, are there TVs in every room? Is that helping our kids develop character and creativity? And we can go into a bunch of that. And again, just remember, right kind of protection. Our kids are going to suffer. We want them to suffer well. Hyde talks about whether we think of phones as the world's longest umbilical cords or as an invisible fence. Childhood autonomy and physical risk-taking plummeted when we started carrying them. Okay. And thirdly and lastly, connect. Crouch's third decision, structure time. To build rhythms into our lives on a daily, weekly, and annual basis that make it possible for us to get to know one another, God, and our world in deeper and deeper ways. I cannot tell you how many times I've had a parent say, there's no time for family dinners. Research suggests that that time is absolutely critical for the long-term flourishing of our kids. I know there's a lot of demands. Again, this is not heaping on guilt. This is like, hey, there is a way forward that is full of life, and it's going to be hard, which is why connecting also means we need allies. We need other parents who are doing this. It is going to be a very real experience for your teenager or your child or whoever when they say, everyone else has a phone and they don't have any boundaries. Okay, that's a very real experience for them that we want to be able to walk with them through and invite them to be part of a community of people, of youth workers, of pastors, of elders, of brothers and sisters in Christ who are like, yeah, I'm with you in that. I'm going to help you parent. Stand on that firm foundation. And we're going to help students know that they're not alone, that there's so much more to life to be offered. And hey, maybe there's like a whole little cohort at ABC of kids that are going through the same thing. Wow. Wouldn't that be awesome? A holy remnant. Not expertise, engagement. You don't have to be a social media expert, okay? You just have to engage. Let your kids teach you about technology. That would be awesome. And curiosity, not judgment, is so important. Just get curious. Our kids are going to fail. Things are going to happen. They're going to see stuff they shouldn't have seen. And we want to teach them to respond to those things well, to come to us as parents and community members, but also how we respond to that failure is going to dictate whether they come back. If we freak out, maybe not so helpful. There are some practical ideas in your notes, and you could take a look at those. I'll just mention the last one. Remember the mission field? Yeah, not just consumers, but participants. Invite your kids that are at the age of using technology to use it in a way where they can help share the gospel, the good news. They can love people. I'll say that I sort of skipped over in the protect section. Again, it's in your notes. Jonathan Hyatt makes some pretty radical recommendations, which I am all in favor of. He says, no smartphone until 14. No social media until 16. He says phone-free schools, which schools is happening in our school. Mark Terrell, superintendent, Stephen and Mark, great relationship, and we have a great relationship with the school, and they are doing this now. And he said almost immediately, huge upticks in interaction, engagement. I mean, it was awesome. And more independent childhood play. Again, this is a lot. I think we need to laugh together. And so my son watched me post something to social media and had a visceral reaction to it. He said, Mom, it hurts me to watch me use your phone. Just let me do it. Anybody? Maybe? How about this one? One of our kids asked me if they could unfriend their grandmother on Facebook because she comments so much on everything. I told him no, but honestly, I was sort of wondering the same thing. Or, okay. The assistant principal at their school sent this email with a list of the students who were at risk of flunking with reasons why for each one. It was supposed to go to the teachers, but he sent it to every parent at the school. Brothers and sisters, as we close here, good news. It's never too late. The good news of Jesus, the grave-robbing, tragedy-turning, life-animating good news of Jesus is that it's never too hard and it's never too late. And man, he gave us each other to do this. Love counts double. It covers a multitude of sins, right? You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to be perfect. And I love what Pastor John Mark Comer says. There is no problem in human life that apprenticeship to Jesus can't solve. And I dare you to try it if you're questioning it. Because, man, it's so good. There's going to be some backlash. We're going to have to test the spirits, and we're going to need each other. And just my closing question for you is, what's your next faithful step on this journey? There is, we're going to actually skip Q&A. I will hang out a little bit after. I'm sorry to do that to you guys. Pastor Lindsay has an awesome announcement, and we ran out of time a little bit. This is a resource guide that we will send out to you that has a list of podcasts, books, articles, instructions for filtering guides. Sorry, Ron, we do not have time. Sure, real quick. Thanks, Ron. We are at a crossroads. That's absolutely right. So scan this if you want it. Please turn it over to Pastor Lindsay. Thank you, everyone, for investing in this.